Hey guys, this is Brother Ray Jones with the First Church of God in Princeton, West Virginia. I want to welcome you to our midweek Bible study. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join with us tonight to study the Word of the Lord. I am honored that you are willing to spend some of your time with me. I'm looking forward to our study tonight as we continue looking at the life of Moses. We're going to be looking at Exodus, the second chapter, verses 16 through 25 tonight. And we're going to talk about lessons learned from failure. So our main text will be Exodus 2, 16 through 25. You want to go ahead and get your Bibles and go ahead and be turning there. As folks are logging on and tuning in, let me encourage you again to participate in this service. If you are watching this through Facebook, we encourage you to hit those like buttons or any of those buttons that represent how you feel about what's being shared. And also feel free to make comments and to join in the conversation with us. We love for you to do that. And again, we love to have the opportunity to learn and grow together. So tonight, we want to talk about lessons learned from failure. And by the way, let me highlight something very quickly. One of the resources that I'm using to be a part of this study and preparing these lessons is a book by Chuck Swindoll. The title of it is Moses, a Man of Selfless Dedication. Chuck Swindoll is an excellent Bible teacher, and he did a whole series of books on different Bible characters, and I highly recommend all of them, especially this one. So just I want you to take note of that as we get started tonight. I have heavily relied on that resource, and he's got a lot of great things to say. So as we share tonight, I'm sharing a lot of things that I've learned from Chuck Swindoll, plus some things that I kind of came up with on my own. So please be aware of that. Tonight, again, we're going to talk about lessons learned from failure. Now, I don't know about you, but one of my favorite things to participate in church, or has been down through the years, is when we have what's called a testimony service. Have you ever been a part of those? That's where you give those who are in the audience an opportunity to testify for the Lord. It has always been a blessing to hear how the Lord has blessed others and worked in their lives. I've gained a lot of encouragement in my walk with the Lord from these kinds of times. I've learned a lot about how to grow my own personal faith by hearing the testimony of others. But I found out a lot of times, way more often than not, in these testimony services, there's one thing that's missing. We usually don't talk about our failures in a testimony service. We don't bring up the stories of when we've just blown it. And I kind of know why. Most of us don't like to talk about our failures. It can be embarrassing to do so. We're afraid of what others might think of us. And there's a lot of pain a lot of times associated with the failures that we experience. And maybe sometimes, quite honestly, we'd like to portray ourselves with an image that we haven't failed. When it comes to sharing our failures with our kids especially, we may be afraid to tell them some of the things that we failed at because we may think that they're going to interpret that as us giving them permission to do the same or worse. Okay, so I understand there are a lot of reasons, some better than others, and maybe one or two of those that are just really no good at all. There are a lot of reasons that we're not open about our failures. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that we've all got to stand up in front of a group of people and talk about all of our deep, dark secrets and where we've really blown it. But here's what I know. I've had people who are mentors, who are giants in the faith for me, who have given me the benefit of setting one-on-one, and they've been real honest with me, not only about their successes. I know about a lot of their successes because I heard them talk about several of those openly. But then in, smaller settings, usually one-on-one settings, they've talked with me about their failures. One such man was a man I hold in such high regard. His name is Dr. John Conley. He has since gone on to be with the Lord. He was the president of Mid-America Bible College at the time. It's now Mid-America Christian University. He was the president of that institution when I attended there several years ago now. He was president for most of the time that I attended. And I love to hear Dr. Conley preach. He taught in some of the classes that I took, or he would teach just certain sessions of them usually. And then I had the opportunity of working with him where he was the speaking evangelist at a camp meeting, and way back then I was actually doing the youth, if you can imagine that. That's been a long time ago. But I had some one-on-one conversations with him then, and then also at some times when I had him down to do a revival and just got to spend some one-on-one time with me. And he was very honest with me and open with me about struggles that he's had in the faith, temptations that he's faced and endured, and just he poured into me in such a way that I appreciate to this very day, because in sharing those things with me, he didn't lose 1 ounce of the respect that I have for him. He actually got a lot more of my respect because I saw his humanity, and he was open and honest with me about it and how God saw him through and got him on the other side. It's easier to focus on when we're successful, but people tend to resonate more with us when we're open with them about our humanity and even our failures. Some things I want us to think about as we get into this idea of lessons learned from failure. So since we've all failed or made mistakes or blown it, we need to remember this. We don't need to let our failures define us. We can let our failures refine us. They can make us bitter if we let them, but they can also make us better. Let me give you a couple of quotes. William Saroyan said this: "Good people are good because they've come to wisdom through failure. We get very little wisdom from success." And that is very, very true. A man by the name of Dennis Waitley said these words: "Mistakes are painful when they happen, but years later, a collection of mistakes is called experience." Take note of that. While we're going through our failures or our mistakes, they're painful, maybe even humiliating, but then after some time passes, that's our experience in life, right? Can I get a testimony out there? I see that hand if you've gotten some experience in your lifetime. I know I have as well, okay? The good news is many people in the Bible we have recorded in the Bible, we'll put it that way, many people's stories and how God saw them through their failures as well as their successes. The psalmist in the 119th Psalm, beginning at verse 65, said these words: "You have dealt well with your servant, O Lord, according to your word. Teach me good judgment and knowledge, for I believe your commandments. Before I was afflicted, I went astray," the psalmist says, "but now I keep your word. You are good and do good. Teach me your statutes. The proud have forged a lie against me, but I will keep your precepts with my whole heart. Their heart is as fat as grease, but I delight in your law. It is good for me that I have been afflicted," the psalmist declares, "that I may learn your statutes. The law of your mouth is better to me than thousands of coins of gold and silver." Listen to those words written by the psalmist centuries ago. It is good for me to be afflicted. Good has come from the difficulties in my life and even the failures of my life, because through those times I've learned more about what you say and who you are and how you want me to live. Failure helps us become more obedient and more teachable. The first step to learning is admitting that you don't know something. Nothing can be more difficult than working with someone who already knows it all, right? Have you ever been around any type of those people? I hope you're not sitting beside them right now. If so, go ahead and just poke them in the side, right? But when someone can't be taught, when they already know everything, well, there's no helping them. Failure helps us become more obedient and teachable. And one of the things we're going to learn through failure is that we don't know everything. Now, we have all probably had a time in our life where we thought we knew, maybe not everything, but we thought we knew way more than we really did know. I know I've had those kinds of times in my life, especially when I was younger. And as I've gotten a little older, I've learned a whole lot of what I don't know. But failure helps us become more obedient and more teachable. Failure reveals what we don't know and that we've got to learn. So what are some lessons we can learn from Moses' failure? Let me recap very quickly. Moses has been, by the providence of God, placed in Pharaoh's household to be raised. He's come of age, and we have every reason to believe that he has a sense about him of God's call on his life to deliver the Hebrews from Egyptian slavery. But he decides to take matters into his own hands. He's out one day checking on the Hebrews, and he sees an Egyptian abusing and oppressing a Hebrew, and he looks this way and that way. He sees no one is around. He thinks no one's watching, and he kills that Egyptian and buries him in the sand. Then the next day, he goes out and he sees two of his brethren, two Hebrews, fighting with one another, and he tries to intervene to get them to reconcile whatever's going on. And when he does, one of them looks at him and says, "Hey, what do you think you're doing here? Are you going to kill me like you did that Egyptian?" And when Moses realized that his deed had been found out, he ran for his life. Pharaoh found out what was going on, and in the twinkling of an eye, Pharaoh turned and said, "Moses must die." So here is Moses now on the run for his life, and he ends up in a desert by the well. So what can we learn from Moses' failure in taking matters into his own hands to try to deliver his people? The first thing we want to note is this: spiritual ends are never achieved by carnal means. Yes, God wanted Moses to deliver his people, but God's plan was not for Moses to get angry and take matters into his own hands and try to free his people by murdering one Egyptian at a time, okay? That just wasn't going to happen. That was not a sustainable plan, let alone it was also not God's plan. Chuck Swindoll notes this point: you cannot sow a fleshly seed and reap a spiritual plant. You cannot plant a carnal act and grow spiritual fruit. Those are wise words. If we are going to do what God wants us to do, we're going to have to do it His way. And we're to operate in the Spirit of God, not in our own carnal flesh. Spiritual ends are never achieved by carnal means. Another thing that we can learn from Moses' failure is this: timing is as important as action. Moses' intent might have been good in wanting his people to be freed, but his actions were not anywhere near what they needed to be. And his timing was off in stepping in to intervene on what needed to be done. And think about this. This thing called timing is very, very important. If the engine in your vehicle loses its timing and things don't function the way they're supposed to, at a minimum, that motor is going to knock and ping, and you're going to get horrible fuel economy. And quite honestly, worst case scenario, you could throw a rod and you could just have all kinds of crazy things happen, all because the things aren't working the way they're supposed to in the timing of the vehicle. Think about timing in other things. If you've ever played baseball, timing is very important in swinging a bat and hitting a ball. The ball is thrown, it's coming your direction. You've got to swing that bat at the right location and at the right time to connect with that ball. Those who do that successfully They get hits. They may even hit it out of the park. Those whose timing is off, they swing and miss, or they don't hit it very well. They hit a foul ball at best maybe, and that's not good. The same is true somewhat with golf. Your swing's got to be a little better. Although the ball's not moving towards you, there's some timing involved with golf as well. Well, if our timing is off and we're not in tune with God's timing on things, it's just not going to work. Chuck Swindoll also said these words: when God is in it, it flows. But when the flesh is in it, it is forced. While we do have to do our part to accomplish what God wants for us to do, we shouldn't have to force God's will. When God's timing is in play, things come together usually a lot easier than when we're operating in the flesh. So Joshua had to lead the people around Jericho once a day for 6 days, and 7 on the 7th day. Keep that in mind. Why did God tell him to do just once a day for 6 days and then 7 days on that final day? I don't know. But that's what God wanted done, and Joshua did that in obedience. And you go back and you read that story, and you'll find out that after they obeyed the Lord, those walls came tumbling down. We don't want to get ahead of God. Sometimes God's got this great plan, and we get all excited about it. And as we talked about in our last lesson, we want to help God out. You remember what Abram and Sarah did to try to help God out, and that was not a good thing. If we get ahead of God, we are going to mess things up. Have you ever seen a dog walking a human? Somebody out trying to walk their dog, and they're really just being pulled behind it. The timing's not off there. They're not in sync, right? I've been on the wrong end of that before, and I thought I was walking the dog. I think the dog was walking me. I've also seen some other things happen. Have you ever seen a human being dragging a dog? Been there and done that too. Had a dog on a leash. We needed to get somewhere. That dog didn't want to come. And well, we weren't cooperating at that point, but I was going to make sure we got to where we were going to get. And that dog reluctantly came with me. The timing wasn't good there either. But think about this with me. Ideally, if you're walking a dog, you're both going at a reasonably good pace that matches one another, and you can walk in sync. When the timing is right, that's how it's supposed to work. That's the way it is with God's timing. We need to be in tune with his timing. Another lesson we can learn from Moses' failure is this: hiding wrong does not erase wrong. It only postpones its discovery. You remember Moses killed this man and then buried him in the sand. He tried to cover up his deed. And all that did was postpone the discovery of the evil that was done. Whenever we try to cover our sin, all it does, it doesn't erase it. It simply postpones its discovery. Think about Adam and Eve. They disobeyed God, and when God came to visit with them in the garden, they hid themselves. And they taught us to hide our sins. It never does any good. I can remember as a kid growing up, I had I'd actually cut my own hair. Boy, I've paid for that now, haven't I? I cut my own hair, and I thought Mom and Dad wouldn't notice. I don't know why I thought they wouldn't notice. I mean, there was a good chunk of my hair that was missing. But I hid the hair that I had cut underneath the sofa in the living room. That was dumb, wasn't it? It was a kid mistake. It was a kid doing something he thought would have been fun and then realized, oh no, what am I going to do now? Well, aren't you glad that once we get to be a certain age, we no longer try those things? I wish that were true. The problem is, when kids do that, it might be cute, but when we get full grown, we still are trying to hide our misdeeds. It doesn't work, my friends. You can hide your wrong, but you can't erase it. And hiding it only postpones its discovery. Proverbs 28:13 says this, "He who covers his sins will not prosper, but whoever confesses and forsakes them will have mercy." Moses' failure teaches us that what we need to do is confess instead of hide. Another thing that it teaches us is this: spiritual leadership is God appointed, not self-assumed. Moses tried to intervene in his own power and assume leadership. Now, God still has it for Moses to lead his people out of bondage, but it's not the appointed time, and Moses is not the appointed leader yet. We need to be sure that we follow God's timing, and when God makes the appointment, then we step up into the position. It's interesting that Moses tried to assume leadership by avenging his countrymen, and later on, as we study into his life, or about his life, he's going to argue with God about taking the position that God wanted him to have. How ironic is that? A.W. Tozer said these words, "A true and safe leader is likely one who has no desire to lead, but is forced into a position of leadership by the inward pressure of the Holy Spirit and by the press of the external situation." I believe those are wise words. When God calls someone to be a leader, a lot of times those leaders are reluctant leaders. Now, I'm not opposed to people who have confidence, but I have watched a lot of people who seem really ready to jump up into leadership with no fear or trembling in their voice at all. My friends, I'm weary of those people. I'm cautious with those people. I understand that God does allow us to have a certain level of ambition, and He wants us to be confident, but He wants all of that to be rooted in Him. And I know it is really easy. I know, unfortunately, from personal experience, when you think you know it all and you just want to jump up there and show everybody how it's supposed to be done. And that was kind of how Moses was at one point. And then he realized that is not the way to be. Perhaps the greatest leaders that God has ever used are those who really didn't want to be leaders, but God compelled them. And they said, as Isaiah did, "Here am I, send me." Moses teaches us a lot from his failure. He also teaches us some things about what it's like, or some lessons we can learn when we're out in the desert. Moses found himself out in the desert by a well. And he can't go back to Egypt at this point. He's running for his life. He's used to being in the lap of luxury. And now he's just hanging out by this well in Midian. And there are a couple of things as we close out tonight that I want us to note that we learn from Moses in the desert. The first is this: he developed a servant's attitude. In Exodus 2, verses 16 and 17, we find these words. "Now the priests of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock." So here is this man, a priest in Midian, who has all girls. And those girls, hey, they can do the work that needs to be done. There really wasn't any choice. They had to do the work. And they come to that well to get water for their father's flocks. And the men just kind of bully them and push them out of the way. Typical of the guys, right? Shame on us. Well, Moses steps up and intervenes. He defends these ladies to the degree that they needed to be defended. Now, ladies, please understand, I know there are a lot of you out there who can stand up for yourselves, and you don't need a man to intervene. I get it. Nothing but respect for that. But in the culture and at the time of what was going on in Moses' day, it was good and right for Moses to intervene and to help them. And he did so with a pure heart and for the right reasons. Now, think about this. Moses thought he was going to deliver all of Israel. And one day he would. But he started learning how to be the right kind of servant deliverer, if you will, by God giving him the chance to deliver 7 damsels in distress. He took care of some little things faithfully, and that showed him and God that he might be capable of taking care of something bigger. By the way, God often prepares us for bigger things by seeing how we do with the smaller things. Please keep that in mind. It's important to note, if you're not faithful in the little things, God most likely won't trust you with something larger. But if you are faithful with the little things, God will trust you with more. Matthew Henry, the great Bible commentator, said this: if you cannot do the good that you would do, do the good that you can do. There's not a one of us who can save the whole world. It's not our responsibility to save the whole world. But we can do what we can do. I often think of this in terms of the problem of litter that we have in our community. Maybe wherever you live, litter's not a problem, but it seems like everywhere I've lived, litter is a problem. And here's what I found out. It doesn't matter how much litter I pick up, I can't pick it all up and somebody just keeps throwing more down. That can be discouraging. But here's what I have learned as well. I'm not responsible for cleaning up the whole world. When it comes to trash, what I'm responsible for first and foremost is taking care of my own trash. And then once I put my trash where it belongs, I might be able to spend a little bit of time picking up some other trash that's either been accidentally discarded or even intentionally discarded. And while I can't clean up the whole world, I might be able to clean up the ditches around my property and maybe so many feet down this way and so many feet down that way. And at least I can do my part. And by the way, if everybody does their part, there wouldn't be a litter problem. Long story short, God doesn't expect me to pick up all the trash in the world. He doesn't expect me to save everybody or to minister to everybody. But he does expect me, and he expects you, to minister to certain people. And if we all do our part, everything will get taken care of. So Moses developed a servant's attitude in the desert. He also learned how to be obscure. Let's look again in Exodus 2, beginning of verse 16. Now the priest of Midian had these 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs of the water for their father's flocks. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "How is it that you have come so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered our flock." So he said to his daughters, "And where is he? Why is it that you've left this man? Call him that he may eat bread." Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. Look at what's happening in this portion of Moses' life. He was in the lap of luxury in Egypt. Now he's out in the wilderness. He couldn't successfully deliver his people by killing one Egyptian at a time because that wasn't God's plan. But he was able to help these 7 ladies out from these thugs that were coming out there and harassing them. And God's rewarding him by providing a way for him to sustain himself by being out in the wilderness and becoming basically a shepherd for the man that soon becomes his father-in-law. He's just minding his own business. He doesn't need to see his name in lights anymore, or he doesn't need to be popular or anything like that. He was willing to be obscure. My friend, listen to me. There's nothing wrong necessarily with wanting to do great things for God, but we must guard against the temptation of maybe wanting to be seen more than we really need to be seen. It is important for us to simply do what we do for the glory of God, knowing that he sees it, and if nobody else ever does or recognizes it, can we be at peace that God sees, and he will, as Jesus said in the New Testament, he'll see us in secret and he will reward us openly. That means that we might live in some obscurity for a time. We won't be in the limelight. We won't be up front. My friend, that is a good place to be. And God can teach us some things during that time. The last thing, and we close out with this, Moses learned there in the desert, or began learning in that desert, to rest and rely on God. Let's pick it up in verses 23 through 25 of Exodus 2. Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of their bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. Look at what's going on here in Moses' story and in the story of the Hebrews. Moses is out resting in the Lord, working hard with his hands, shepherding a bunch of sheep. He's gotten married. We find out later he's raising a family. And while all that's going on, the Pharaoh who sought to kill Moses passes away. And the people of God begin crying out, "We need a deliverer. God, have mercy on your people." God hears their cry. And at the same time they're crying out, God has been working on Moses to prepare him for something more that we're going to study about in future lessons. What Moses is learning while he's out in this wilderness experience is to wait on the Lord, to rest in him, to rely on him. And we're eventually going to see how all of that comes together so that Moses can go and be the leader that he's supposed to be and set God's people free. So, I don't know how you may have failed in your life. All I know is that you have, and I know I have. I'm not picking on you for failing. Don't get me wrong. We've all failed. But please understand, we don't have to let our failures define us. We can learn from our failures, and we should learn from the failures of others. We can learn from Moses' failures tonight. And I hope and pray that you have learned something as I have. Thank you for your time. God bless you. Have a wonderful evening.